Ich stell uns mal vor, der Gavin weiß schon Bescheid, dass wir jetzt die Einleitung auf Deutsch machen. Und erstmal herzlich willkommen zum ersten Wine Talk zwischen Gavin Chanin aus Santa Barbara, den ihr dort seht, und meiner Wenigkeit Alexander Seiser aus Berlin. Und wir dachten uns mal, dass wir einfach mal Winzer einladen, mit denen ein bisschen quatschen, ohne jetzt sag ich mal, jetzt einen kommerziellen Hintergrund aufzudecken oder auch zu bespielen, sondern wir wollen einfach die Menschen hinter dem Wein besser kennenlernen. Ist natürlich einfach jetzt eine Herausforderung durch die aktuelle Situation, dass wir jetzt halt am PC sitzen, und falls es mal irgendwie zu Schwierigkeiten mit Ton oder Verbindung und Video kommt, einfach in dem Chat mal schreiben. Wir können jede Frage nochmal wiederholen oder jede Antwort. Das wäre, glaube ich, ganz, ganz wichtig. Also jeder, der was zu sagen und zu fragen hat, der kann uns über die Chat-Funktion eine Nachricht schreiben. Und ansonsten ist es so, dass wir den Wine Talk auf Englisch fortsetzen, weil es natürlich für den Gavin einfach entspannter ist. Und genau, ich stelle so ein paar Fragen, Gavin ein bisschen von sich erzählen, und dann haben wir einfach eine lockere Runde. Und falls, wie gesagt, falls Anregungen, Anmerkungen sind, einfach bitte schreiben. Und ich würde sagen, dass wir unseren ersten Wine Talk starten. So now we will switch in English. So I explained the visitors what we are doing tonight, that we drink some beer, and so here is night, so in California it's early in the morning. And yeah, just welcome Gavin Chanin from Santa Barbara. So if I'm honestly, and I'm an honestly person, for me, one of the best winemakers from California, because I met him personally. I drank a lot of wines from the early beginning until now, and I'm very impressed that we have on the other side of the world such a great style of wines. If we talk about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in a new world, and yeah, so very welcome to our wine talk, and it's a pleasure to host you tonight here at Zoom meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for Yeah, so I'm Gavin Chanin. I started my company in 2007. Up in North Hollywood, actually, and was a art student, studying mostly painting. And when I was 18 years old, I wanted to get out of town, so I randomly found a internship at Au Bon Climat up in Santa Barbara, which turned out to be one of the oldest, most well-known wines in Santa Barbara and in California in general. And I fell in love with it. I basically never left. So I worked at First Harvest. The joke I always tell is it was so much fun. I thought it was an unpaid job, but it turned out they just forgot to pay me. So the next year they said, hey, how much did we pay you last year? And I said nothing. And they said, no, that's not possible. So they had just forgotten. But I just became a continued art at university, painting at UCLA, and but spent every second I had outside of university in Santa Barbara learning about wine. And it was kind of interesting. I didn't have a good amount of experience at that point. So I had worked 04, 05, 06, and then in 2007 I took a year off university and worked in South Africa, and then flew to New Zealand, which it's a little unless you have a globe, New Zealand and South Africa seem kind of close together, but they're really not. So after 24 hours on a plane, I arrived in South Africa, and then flew back to Europe and traveled around in Italy and Champagne, and just tasting and learning, and then came back to California. And I knew I wanted to do wine, but I wasn't sure what my prospects would be. I didn't education in wine. And I also became more and more enamored with kind of a classic style of Chardonnay and Pinot, which now is very popular, but at the time, not only was it not popular, but people thought it wouldn't be commercial. Basically, so I took my life savings at that point, which was about $5,000 or $6,000, and I started a winery with 6 barrels of wine. So started making Pinot and Chardonnay. It was a very stubborn kind of exactly how I wanted to make it. So found old vineyards, sites, aged in one barrel for 18 months, bottled everything unfiltered, and slowly picked up a following with sommeliers. That was in the beginning, it was all sommeliers that bought the wine. And then as things started to change in California, the trends started to change. Our audience became bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we sell wine all over the world. So we're a very small company. We do about 5,000 cases. So, roughly 60,000 bottles. And it's just 3 of us here, Jennifer, the general manager in the office, myself, and then Luis, our cellar master. So very, very small operation. We work with a handful of really great vineyards, which I can show you on Google Maps in a bit.
Yeah. And why did you choose to start at Jim Clenadon or Bon Climat? So that was your first. It was,
yeah, it was the only place I could get a job. So it was totally luck to end up and not end up at a bad winery, I would say. The other amazing thing about working was we got to taste, and Marcus can tell you this too, but we got to taste tons of wine from all over the world. Every day at lunch, we tasted wine. So to get a quick education in wine, I was incredibly lucky. Let's see, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I can hear you.
Do you want me to show you the Santa Barbara area?
We are waiting for your presentation that the visitors can have a look inside your region.
Okay, perfect. So if everyone got Google Maps up, let's see if I can move this. There we go. So Santa Barbara is extremely distinctive because we and then it cuts inland. So Santa Barbara is somewhat unique because if you're standing in the middle of Santa Barbara County, which is right here, you'll see that we have west. So this little region of Santa Barbara millions of years ago broke off and twisted, and that's what really makes Santa Barbara unique. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit. So the whole idea is we have this incredibly special kind of exposure to the Pacific Ocean. All the water's coming from extremely cold. So we essentially have a giant refrigerator. So people think of California, they think of warm weather and sunshine and Baywatch and all that stuff. Santa Barbara is actually very cool because of and essentially I'm going to show you, we have 3 AVAs that I'm interested in. We have, and they're essentially 3 cool climate valleys. So these are totally open to the Pacific. Out in the middle, and then Santa Rita Hills, probably the most famous. I personally like them all equally. I especially like Los Alamos, which is the least well known, but they're all kind of unique in their own ways, and they all have unique. So one thing I say about California as a whole and Santa Barbara in particular is that we really have to work hard to find great soils, but we have this amazing climate. So my mission is to find special soils that then pair with our climate. you know, it's much different than Burgundy, where you have amazing soils and you kind of have to fight the climate continuously.
Yeah.
So we have an amazing climate, but you have to really search.
And the region is famous for
People, the region's mostly famous for Pinot and Chardonnay, and I would say Syrah would be kind of the third tier.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Santa Barbara is, I would argue, we can grow just about anything at a very high level. So you do see Nebbiolo, you do see, you know, at El Buen Clima, I think we made more than 40 varietals. So varietals, as you move further away from the ocean, it gets warmer and warmer. So you actually have fairly warm climate here to the east, and an extremely cool climate here by the coast. So it's a very interesting.
And there's
people often ask me, what's the, I'm sorry, what's that?
Yeah, do you have also some mountain ranges which protect the warmer inland climate?
We don't really have ranges that protect it, but if you zoom in, you'll see you get, as you move, because the cool weather is coming from the coast here, as you move further back here, the ocean influence does reach better. So so the cool air kind of fights its way from the west to east. So you can literally predict the weather based on how close you are to the coast. In general, we say 1 degree Fahrenheit per mile.
Okay.
In this, we can measure it, but this is about, let's see. This is, we'll put in miles for the fun of it. One, it's about 22 miles. So you'll see a 22 Fahrenheit difference, which is, you know, pretty extreme. People ask me a lot about how do you identify Californian wines, or wines from Santa Barbara. And I just want to point out one thing really quickly, which is the distance from Santa Barbara to Sonoma. Let's see, is roughly, should be about 500 kilometers, 526 kilometers. And if we'll see, the distance from Burgundy to Bordeaux is roughly the same.
Okay.
That's one of the most difficult questions I get, which is how do I identify a California wine? You know, we have to remember that California is a huge state, and we always think California should be its own country, and if it was, I think it would be, you know, a fairly substantial country. So there's a lot going on in Santa Barbara. The three vineyards, my three main vineyards that I work with. Let's see, I'll show you San Fernando Benedict, Los Alamos, and Bienacido. These are three main vineyards. So you can see with the company strategy is I really want to make wines from the oldest vines and what I consider the best vineyards in these three areas. And in these vineyards, we have three. So let's start at the north with Bienacido. Vineyard here in 1973, and the soil type is well, actually there's about 6 or 7 unique soil types just in this vineyard, but the main thing to look at is we have Boston, and then this is all alluvial soil by the river, and there's actually the largest gravel quarry in the Central Coast across the street from Bienacido. So when I talk about finding, this is kind of what I'm looking for. So unique soil to go with our great climate, and you add in old vines, that makes it kind of perfect. The next is Los Alamos sand. It's actually the ancient sand dunes are what makes up the hills of Los Alamos, and you can see some younger dunes by the coast here. Sand is a really fascinating soil for me. A lot of people kind of think it's boring, and I think it's fantastic. You have all sorts of different things going on, and I love the freshness that it gives. There's the ocean. I love the freshness that it gives the wine, especially Pinot. And then the very last and probably the most complex soil we work with, which people for years and years called limestone, is diatomaceous earth.
Mm-hmm.
And actually the largest, I believe this is one of 2 diatomaceous earth mines in the world. Calcium, but very similar to limestone, high pH, well draining. It looks like snow.
Yeah.
Google Maps is a little crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, about any unique sources is what I'm really after. And you can see here Sanford and Benedict, and I showed you the mine because it makes it the most obvious. But if you zoom in Sanford and Benedict, 1871, you have you can actually see the little outcrops of the white diatomaceous earth soil. I make wine in a in Wine Ghetto, in the town of Lompoc. So this is our winery here. Lompoc became a hub for wineries because and you also had very cheap warehouses. So a lot of small wineries that didn't have lots of money came to Lompoc. So this is our winery. You can see my sign here. And if you go, and these wineries just right here. So it's kind of a hub of winery and winemaking, all sorts of different people. Lots of American trucks as well. And let's see, to go back to wine style, and since we don't all have the same wines in our glass, I think Santa Barbara is tremendously unique. So vines were first planted here in the 1960s. How's my camera? Vines were first planted in the 1960s. I would argue that great wines started being made in 1980, 1990. So we're an extremely young area that I think has a ton of potential and is making a lot of waves. World of wine. There's definitely a lot of people hunting for wines from Santa Barbara. It's almost a breath of fresh air in California because you have that cool weather gives the wines more acidity and more freshness. So especially in export markets that like classic wines, especially in Europe, you see people gravitating towards Santa Barbara. And I like to joke that for me it's Santa Barbara, and my wines in particular are the school night wines for serious Burgundy drinkers, because we have handmade wines, classic, very traditional style, old vines, but then you add in a California vine and something very unique.
So it's more like a fingerprint wines. So do you are you agree that you have fingerprint wines if you talk about Californian Pinot Noir or Chardonnay?
I've never heard that term, fingerprint wines.
Okay. So it's more like
as in something like very
yeah. So if you are a winemaker, just think a lot and spend a lot of time of making wine. So not in a commercial way, but only in a very in a very positive way to make a wine which is unique for your region, and also you can also sell it on the European market. That's in like your case. I guess this is a fingerprint wine because your style is for me, there's no second winery that can afford this type of style. And so I've first question. So why did you become a winemaker? So what was your changing moment that you switched from the from art gallery, from the studying to go to the wine?
So I can literally remember my very first job at Au Bon Climat was stomping on stems when they came out of the destemmer. So I fell in love with it. It was literally the first thing I did at the winery. And you know, when you're starting at a winery and you don't know anything, you do the same job for forever. So my first harvest, I basically the only two jobs. I punched down and I stomped on stems and I cleaned the destemmer, and I just loved every second of it. So it was literally love at first sight. So I feel lucky that I was 18 years old and I found, you know, kind of for life at a young age. So it's all luck. And I didn't even know about like the fancier. I think a lot of people get into wine maybe in the US because of, you know, the restaurants and the life, and it's kind of glamorous and you have all this wine and great things. I didn't discover that until, you know, years down the road. In the beginning, I was in the cellar for a long time.
Do you remember your first wine you drank before you became a winemaker?
I remember in high school, I had a fake ID and I bought a bottle of Australian, and it had one of those cheesy gold medal labels on it. I thought, God, this must be good. It was like $15. And I thought it was delicious. And that was one of the first growing up, I loved wine. So I was always a family bartender. So when I was 10, 11 years old, I was opening all the bottles. So I always had an interest in wine, but you know, you never think I can make this, because it's just, you know, that would be a very strange thought for someone, a young kid to have, unless you have family who's making wine. So it really just random.
So after Au Bon Climat Winery, you moved to Europe to learn something from the old world style. So you went to Burgundy and Italy.
Yeah, just to taste. I wish I could have worked, but I had been traveling for 6 months doing wine across the world, so I had to go home at that point.
What was
tasting, looking at beards? Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, what was your best experience at in Burgundy, for example?
So I think one of my favorite winemakers was meeting. The first place we went to was Paul Piot. I met with Paul and his son Thierry, and they're friends to this day, and just great wines. I think my other two kind of like heroes in wine was we were able to taste at DRC on that trip, which was amazing, but also at Costa Rica, which I've only been to that one time. And the wines were just fantastic. And I remember asking him if he had a business card at the end of the tasting, because I wanted to keep a friendship. And he said, "No, I don't have a business card." He said, "Do you have an email address?" He says, "No email." I said, "Do you have a phone number?" And he goes, "No phone number." And I go, "Do you have an address?" He goes, "No, I don't have a mailing address." And I go, "Man, I'm literally standing under your house. I could just walk to the street and write the number down." But I kind of love that. So I was lucky to travel with a group of older wine professionals. Raj Parr was actually on that trip. I see his book behind you. So I was, you know, a 21-year-old kid who was lucky to just be kind of hitching a ride with some famous wine people.
This is the normal way in Burgundy. So you can't write an email. You have to call them, and you have to wait if somebody gets up the phone. And so I also had it 3 years ago in Von Romanée, because you know they just in front of the famous Romani Conti winery, and I rang the bell and I looked through the door, I'm still waiting that hopefully anybody opens up, but there was no chance to get a private audience. And it's, yeah, so I totally agree and understand the Burgundy way to, yeah, to get a business card, something like that. And
Yeah.
did from your traveling, did you learn things that you can today just that you find again in your way of winemaking? Is there?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a tricky question. There is, you know, when you work at wineries, and this is going to sound worse than it actually is, but you learn things that you want to do, and you also learn things that you don't want to do. And for me, I think that the thing I learned most was just seeing different vineyards, seeing different ways of working. You know, in California, we have I had only worked for one very specific way of working. So, you know, even just physical stuff like chalking barrels in South Africa. And you also see other regions' challenges. So, for instance, in South Africa, there was a lot of challenge with leaf roll virus. So, which now we're dealing with in Santa Barbara. So you kind of learn some of those tricks, and then tasting in Burgundy, I remember. I mean, this is a little silly, but working in South Africa, we didn't work with the lees a lot. There was a lot of very clean wine put in barrel, and going to Burgundy, you see people aging on the lees for long amounts of time. And in California, it was fairly standard to age on the lees for 8 to 9 months and then to rack the wine. So when I got home, I definitely extended that. And to this day, we try to age on lees for as long as we can, up to 14 or 15 months sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And you also see, you know, it's also interesting to see things change. So going to Burgundy over the years, you know, seeing Burgundy change, for such an old region, it changes much faster than I think anyone realizes sometimes.
But do you think that California also, just in special your region, also changed very fast the last 25 years, something like that?
Yeah, in the 1990s, and I wish I had the exact numbers, but I don't think there were more than 15 or 20 wineries in Santa Barbara. Now there's more than 400. So you have, you know, and you know, like every wine region, you have a lot of bad wineries and some really good ones. But when you have more and more people, the competition becomes really good. So I think it's a great thing for this area, and it pushes everyone to just constantly get better and better and better. One of the changes I've seen just in the past 10 years is everyone's getting much better at farming. So when I started farming, it was kind of like a American Marlboro commercial. You know, some guy would jump off a truck with cowboy boots and kind of look at the grapes and turn on water or do something. It was very seat of the pants. There wasn't much hands-on farming, and now the we work with is just so amazing, and the partners that we work with in the vineyards are really incredible. So that's something I could point out, even in the past 5 to 10 years, just massive changes of and I attribute that to competition and everyone working harder and harder.
So you started in 2007 and 2008 to work in the vineyards, but are there any problems to plant a vineyard in your region?
For no, not really. Our big problem is water. We're a Mediterranean climate here, so we don't have very much water, and most of the rain that we have comes during the winter. So we typically get about 30 centimeters of rain, almost all of which comes between November and February. And to do a great job dry farming, we probably need 3 to 4 times as much. Some of our vineyards are dry farmed, but it's a huge commitment. And one of those vineyards, and lucky that they have some natural springs behind the vineyards, but we're incredibly dry, which is great for some things, but it can also be problematic. And with marine influence, our mildew, but we're pretty on top of that, so not too many major problems there.
But it's also the ripening period is around about 130 days, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's incredibly long. Most peanut regions, I'll use Oregon and Burgundy as an example, are about 100 days. That was always the classic rule. If you got 100 days, that would be a good harvest. And the interesting thing about that for Santa Barbara, that 30 days comes because of our cool climate. So that really spreads out the growing season. And that gives us about 600 extra hours of sunlight. So it really is incredible the impact that has. And that's why I think sunlight is one of like the main, even, you know, it's the most important characters of Santa Barbara is having that brightness to the wines.
And do you have in effect of the global warming? So global warming is a global thing. How do you change your winemaking philosophy? Do you change or you do not change it? Do you just make your style like it is right now, or do you have to affect them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. First off, I'm happy we have a new president who believes that global warming is a real thing. Thankfully, a couple days ago, very, very happy time in America. But you know, it's a really interesting question for Santa Barbara because we have that coastal influence. We've actually seen incredibly cool growing seasons, cooler than normal growing seasons for the past 5-6 years. What we have seen, which is a problem, is warmer winters. So classic coastal climate, we have a cool summer, but a warm winter. And if the winters are too warm, we don't get the frost that we need. Or the season starts too early and there's bud break when it's dangerous for frost in February or early March. Even this, if I showed you outside, it's like sunny, I'm wearing a t-shirt. So this winter's been incredibly warm, which is nice to live, but not great for the vine. So we're seeing challenges, but not during the growing season, during the off season.
Okay. And do you see any quality change of the wines if the growing season is so different?
To be honest, the cool growing seasons are perfect for my style of wine. So I'm incredibly happy with the quality of the past vintages, going back the last 10 years or so. The challenge with kind of those winter issues that we face is really quantity, because if the season starts too early and we have frost, especially when there's no water to frost protect, then we could lose a whole crop. So we have that. In California, you also see danger with wildfires, which is connected to global warming. It's not 100% caused by global warming, but that's a big component of it. We're also very lucky in Santa Barbara that our wildfires mostly burn grass versus redwood or oak trees. Smoke gets pushed out fairly quickly, but that's still a major concern for California. Especially, last year 2020 was for the wine business one of the worst fire seasons ever.
Yeah, that's right. And so you start with buying grapes in the early beginning. What is now the way you do it? Do you generally buy grapes, or do you have your own?
Yeah, so I started buying grapes in 2007. It's funny, it was actually about a year ago before Corona, I had a meeting with someone and they said, what did you do before wine? Were you in technology or medicine? And I said, no, I was in school. So the idea of buying a vineyard when you have no money is just not possible. So my dream one day, I hope, is to own some vineyards. But right now we purchase fruit, and we have some long-term leases, which are kind of poor man's estate vineyard, but not really estate. So it's kind of interesting. When you own your land, you have, control over everything. No one, you have control over pricing. You have control over farming. No one can, but there are benefits also to being a negociant, which is we get to work with 40 to 50-year-old vines. We get to find these perfect little spots. If we see problems, we can move, which is kind of nice. So really, I like to say we're like Burgundy in the 1920s. We're negociants now, but in the future, one of my worries is, there's only so much land that can grow great Pinot Noir. So as estates realize that they have something for negotiants, like, so that's a long answer to your question, but no vineyards yet, but one day. It's a dream.
Very, very good, and answer right now. So I have a lot of ideas and questions in my head. So if you have to describe your philosophy at your winery, just do it in 3 words.
Ooh, 3 words. 3 words. That's all I get.
That's tricky. I know.
I think yeah, that is tricky. I would say
you can also
hands, I would say hands-on with a dash, so that's only 1 word. A classic, and I would say is serious, and the third I would say is simple. And we work in very basic ways here. I'll tell you a funny story. There was a pretty famous winemaker in Santa Barbara who never made Chardonnay. He only made red varietals. And he called me one day and he said, "I'm making my, how do you make your Chardonnay? I like your Chardonnay." So I go, my philosophy is kind of that there are no secrets. I'm happy to tell people exactly how we do things. There's no secret formula. And it takes about 18 months, but it's really only 16 steps. So once the wines are picked, they come to the winery, we press them and put them in barrel. I'll count that as 1 step. We top the wines, we rack them in about 14 months, return to barrel, and then we rack and bottle the wine. So it's basically 5 steps. Telling people could it possibly be that simple, that I had been trying to sabotage him by telling him the wrong answer. So really, my entire philosophy is to find great vineyards, great sites, and once they get into the cellar, I want it to be as boring as possible in the wine cellar.
Hi, Alex and Gavin.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
there are 2 questions. After your answer, can you answer for the questions? Do you see the Q&A? There's 1 question, and in chat, Francie asked something, so you can answer. Sorry.
So
yeah, so I'm 99% Pinot and Chardonnay into that. Oh yeah, sorry.
Right, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, so to quickly answer the question, I'm almost 100% Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I've made a tiny amount, like 500 bottles of Syrah. To go back to Alex's question, it's we work simply with varietals too. We really only do a couple things, and the idea is to do it in a high quality way.
And so we have another question. So how do you focus, or how do you plan if you talk about organic wines? So how do you think about it to avoid it in your vineyards?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I experienced organic farming very early on at Bon Climat because their state vineyard was this was 16, 17 years ago. God, I'm getting old, but at the time that was pretty rare. And one of the struck me a lot of benefits to organic farming. But for the thing that really struck us at that time was it made the winemaking a lot easier. The fruit was healthier. The fermentations went easier. There were less problems. It was more in balance. So for me, with farming, and especially organic farming, which is a big focus, is number one is making and do the side benefits of it being better for the soil and the environment long term. And I will say, organic farming is not always better. There is where you can actually do a lot of damage to your soil, and so I'm not dogmatic. It has to be done in a really good way, or it doesn't work. So that's why I think in the U.S. and with me in particular, you're seeing more and more vineyards say we're organic but not certified. We're biodynamic, because a lot of people are tired of the certification companies, which just profit and kind of make really silly rules sometimes. So that's kind of my philosophy on it. And my hope is we're not 100% organic right now. We're like 80% organic at the moment. Next 4 to 5 years.
But are there any problems if we talk about water using, irrigation, especially in your region, because of the special climate?
Yeah, so irrigation is fairly common here in Santa Barbara. Rainfall. The irrigation is similar to organics, where you can use it to your advantage, or you can be lazy and do a really bad job and do a lot of damage to the vineyards. So we had a famous droughts that went on for 3 or 4 years. That was in, God, when was that? 2014 to about 2017, plus or minus. And we learned a lot during that drought. One thing we learned is when you get lazy with irrigation and you just constantly water, you can have vines that are 15 years old that behave like they're 3 years old. So they have no root structure. They have none of the benefits of getting older and more mature, established, because they've just had an easy life of just water, nutrients. So you can do a lot of damage. You can cause a lot of problems by over irrigating. And if you irrigate correctly, you can argue that there's a lot of benefits of you don't need to worry about the sky dropping rain on your fruit at a bad time. I don't think this is revolutionary, but we get in fights about it here in Santa Barbara. But I want irrigation to mimic rain. So I'd rather people irrigate a lot and then not irrigate for 5, maybe 6 weeks, and then irrigate a little more. But people get stuck in their ways, and they get a little lazy, and they just start irrigating every week. And work. So during those drought years, we saw vineyards like Sanford and Benedict, which are dry farmed, do incredibly well. And then, like I was saying, we saw other vineyards really do poorly. So irrigation's like organics. You can't just say, "Oh, this is good, this is bad." There's the correct way to irrigate, and then there's not incorrect ways to irrigate.
And are there any vintages that were difficult to you in the past 5 years?
Yeah, some of my favorite vintages have been probably the most difficult ones. so 2010, 2010 and 2017 were like 2 vintages in one because we had a large heat wave. So you had, if you picked before the heat wave, you could make these really age-worthy, classically styled wines that I loved. If you picked after, to me, the wines were kind of soupy and sweet and not very good. And both those, I think I at the correct time, so I can brag a little bit. 2014 was a challenge because that was the first time we saw the effects of what a really warm winter can do. So the harvest came 1 month early, which is just, no one had ever seen or heard of anything like it. It came so early that people weren't ready for it. And I'll put myself in that camp. We just all kind of said this can't actually be happening. The interesting thing is this season was annoying because the warm winter, it started a month early. So it started and finished a month early. And it led to us rethinking, and 2015 was similar and 2016 was similar. So it really changed the whole, we saw 3 historic harvests in a row. And I think a lot of us really noticed at that time of like, wow, this is very different. Things are changing here. So yeah, those were probably the most, I would say 17, 14, and 10 were probably the most.
And do you think that your vineyards, the 3 vineyards you mainly work with, which one is better suited for like a difficult vintage, so for unexpected vintage, or are they all the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really hard to say because every vintage, some vineyards just kind of shine, and some, and sometimes it's just luck. Like for instance, this isn't a vineyard that I work with, but the past year, there was a vineyard that wanted to save money, so they didn't pull any leaves, which can lead to problems with mildew and whatnot. So it's always kind of a balance. And then there was a heat wave this past year. So the vineyard that was actually trying to save money and not working better than the vineyards that were doing everything in the way we would want. So sometimes it's kind of random. In general, I almost think our most consistent vineyard is Los Alamos. That doesn't mean it's our best vineyard. I almost, it's Los Alamos has a freshness and a vibrancy to it. It doesn't always have the complexity that Bienesito and Sanford and Benedict have, but there's just something about it that it's just really well. And for consistency and not having bad vintages is probably the best vineyard. On the flip side, its potential for greatness is probably a little lower than the other vineyards we work with. So okay, it's kind of a spectrum.
And so which wine gives you an open mind impression? So if you have it from, I don't know, from a 2017 vintage, all the wines in front of you, you will open it. So which vineyard gives you a very open-minded and early drinking impression?
Although 17 Sanford and Benedict is a very open wine too. So, it's like asking me to compare my children. I don't have any kids, but
but so I've
told you this.
You can go. You can go.
Say my father used to always say, I love my kids the same, but I don't always like them the same.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about my wines. I love them all, but on any given day.
That's a very good answer. And so what kind of clones do you use in a vineyards? Well, it's not from California. The wines come from France.
Yeah, so basically we work with Dijon clones, and then what we now call heirloom clones, which came from France originally, but much in the 40s, 50s, 60s. It's interesting, when I started in the early 2000s in wine, Dijon clones were like the coolest thing in the world. Everyone wanted Dijon clones, and wineries started getting really weird. 1.5, 1.6, 7. I honestly don't get too caught up in clones. To me, it's about site. And if you have a great site, it seems like just about every clone works. If you have a bad site, you really have to work hard to find the right balance. I would say if I had the opportunity to plant a vineyard today, I would plant at least half of it, probably much more, in the heirloom clones. So things like Mount Eden, Pomard. Clones. We work with a lot of Dijon clones. I'd say mostly Dijon clones, but they're not perfect for California. Dijon clones are designed for a short growing season to ripen fairly quickly. And we have this long season, so the Dijon clones, they ripen quickly, they lose acidity quickly. And in California, that's not always a good thing. So I would probably plant half and half Dijon clones and older clones. I love Pomard, I love Mount Eden. I love 2A, which is a hard clone to find here, but it seems to work pretty well. And then the other thing is I work with a lot of old vines. So part of the reason I don't fall in love with clones is because when you're looking at old vines, it's not like you're talking to someone and they're planting a vineyard and you can pick and choose. It's such a rare, there's so few hectares still planted to old vines. You don't really get a choice. So you get used to not having a choice, which is good.
But do you also do vineyard selection of the wines?
Vineyard selection as in single so most of the wines I make are single vineyard. So they're 100% from one of these vineyards. Generally with single vineyard wines, I identify kind of my favorite spots in the vineyards, and we'll work with 2 or 3 different parcels within the vineyard. Okay. Sometimes we work with just one. Biennacido Chardonnay, it's just one. What else? Sanford and Benedict Chardonnay is just, but usually I like to pick the best parcels I can find, and that's almost always based on soil. So I'm looking for the most unique soil in that area, and we work with those.
And if we just let our visitors know how your wines taste, if they don't have it in a glass, so that's, for me, it's the most challenge to talk about the taste of your wine. If you like to explain your wines in short words, yeah. Just what makes it favorite? Why they have to choose your wines?
Yeah. In university, I took an entire course on how to describe color, just like of paintings or color in nature. And what we realized at the end is it's impossible to describe color without referencing other colors. But for my wines, I would say the most compelling aspect of my wines is they're made by hand in a very old school style, but they come from this new school area. So you have a wine that has potential to age for 15 plus years, but also is delicious young. I would say that the wines are not cheap, wines, because there's not this day and age in 2021, there's not too many wines at our price point that can age for that long. And then being delicious young, being balanced. When I first got into wine, I started collecting wine for myself, and I always looked for the most hard tannic wines because I wanted to age them for a long time, and I love drinking old wine. And what I learned with a lot of wines, but especially with Pinot and Chardonnay, is that if it's hard and austere and tannic, sometimes it never comes around, and it's just hard and austere for the rest of its life. If it's too fruity, it's a flash in the pan, as we say. So it's amazing. Couple seconds, couple years, couple minutes, and then it just dies, and there's nothing left. So I think Pinot Noir gives a winemaker a great opportunity to be able to bring a customer a bottle of wine that they can open that night, and it's delicious and there's all these layers, but also aged. It goes incredibly well with food because there's acidity and freshness and lower alcohol. But because of that brightness it doesn't necessarily need food all the time. So I think if I saw myself speaking like this now, back when I was starting, I'd be really upset, because back when I was starting, I was very militant that this is the way the wine is and this is how it should be drunk. And now I kind of realize all these, that it really is versatile, and can do some, there's some really well balanced, and can basically do anything.
And
before Corona, I used to do a lot of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
so I agree with your words, because I tried your wines in the restaurant. I tried your wines with the food. I tried the wines to put it in my cellar and to drink it just 1, 2, 3 years later, or just I go also with you that your wines can also age for 15 years, maybe longer, depends on the vintage. And also with the price. So if you go, for example, if you go to Burgundy right now and you like to have a very classic Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, you have to spend a lot of money for, I don't know, for the historical, for the name, for the region. But if you just move to California, to Santa Barbara, is that the climate is very special, and also the soil is special, but the result is so individual that I like the wines from this region much more than if I stay in Europe, in Burgundy. So it's totally different, both regions, but your wines are quite masterpieces. So they don't give me money to say these words.
Thank you.
That's more my opinion. I worked with you together, and yeah, great answer so far. And what is also special on your bottles is that you create your own labels. Yeah.
So and I can show you quickly, actually, since I'm in the cellar, but it's a little messy at the time, but every label has a different, every wine has a different label on it. So this kind of helps me keep in touch with my art career a little bit. Some labels are better than others.
Yeah. And so what I like on your labels is that, so every vintage, every bottle has a different style, a different picture, but the picture is, for me, is quite 100% what is inside the bottle. So sometimes you have a lot of flavors inside the wine. Then you also have a lot of paintings on the label. So that is my way of thinking about the wines. And then you have a very clear, very simple label. And then sometimes the wine is also very, very, very classic and serious. And that's what the labels talk to me as a sommelier. I don't know how the private customer.
Yeah, no one's ever noticed that before, but I do kind of choose the labels without too much thought, and I kind of let my emotions choose them. And you're 100% correct that something like Los Alamos will be like a lot of color and kind of easy and bright and pleasing to look at, and something like Sanford and Benedict has just been black and white for like 5 years, so more serious. But most people don't notice that, so I appreciate it.
And how long do you take time to create a label?
So it's really a mix. I don't create paintings specifically for the wines. I paint and I make wine and then I put them together. So to be honest, some of the labels I made 15 years ago, and some I made 5 weeks ago. So it really is a mix. It's kind of fun. I can give you if you want a sneak peek at a new label, I can show it to you. So this is this is something new coming soon. So the new labels will be will have a little more color, which should be a little fun. But
perfect. So Sanford and Benedict will be a firework.
Yep.
Because
and every other label will be one too.
So to me and maybe to the visitors looks like a firework, but for you as an art people, that maybe that's a lot of things in your head that decide to draw this line.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a firework.
Yeah, but I like it. So depends on the wine. So we have to see each other after tasting, and so back of you, I see a lot of barrels. Is there wine inside right now?
Yeah. There there is wine inside. Let me see if I can. Okay, so there's wine inside these, and half of these, but none of these.
Okay.
And this is our entire production from 2020 and 2019. Okay. So, like I was saying, we're making about, depending on the vintage, 40 to 60,000 bottles per year.
And at 10% is new oak, or do you change?
Yeah, 10 to 15% new oak. The rest is neutral. Mostly Francois Ferrer, which is a barrel that some people don't like, but I find works really well. You know, barrels are funny. A lot of the use of barrels comes from, I think, a winemaker knowing how to work with them. So I try using barrels that I know are really great and they don't work that well because my winemaking is not perfect for it. And then other people try Francois Ferrer and they go, no, it's not too strong, which it is. But it works well for me. I think the most amazing barrels are Ridge is the only winery that's figured out how to use American oak and have it be amazing. And no one knows the secret except Ridge. So.
And do you prefer special barrel producers?
Yeah, so I prefer Francois Ferrer from the Vosges forest, which they now call kind of, what do they call Vosges special grain? Francois Ferrer has these strange names, but it's not as tight grain as but I think Vosges gives you like just a beautiful kind of ethereal integration with the wine. So and I've been using these barrels. So I am a little stubborn with some things.
And do you how do you feel about your market position on your wines in the US? So how is this common?
Yeah, the market position is very interesting these days. We sell most of our wine in Europe. So Germany, UK, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Russia, a little bit in Asia, and then the rest in the US. So the US market is very difficult because there's a lot of laws and every state is basically like a separate country. And sometimes it's really insane how difficult it is. So for me, it's really exciting because I basically love a couple very simple things about wine. I think it tastes good. That's important. I think it ages and lives. You know, it has this life to it, which I think is one of the most beautiful things about wine. And the third thing, which people don't talk about very much, is wine was designed to travel. There's really no other product like it that was purposely designed to be sent across the world and has been sent around the world for, you know, more than 100 years, 200 years. So I love the idea that we can send wine to people in Europe or people in Asia, and they can experience, you know, the gravel soil at Biennacido from 8,000 miles away. So I love that we make all the wines here by hand and then we spread them far and wide. That's probably one of the most exciting things for me about the business.
So you don't like to grow your winery in the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, we don't have any plans to grow. I think for me it's about quality. So we want to make better and better and better wines. There's no I think if you talk to winemakers in California 20 years ago, they'd all ask each other, oh, how much wine are you making? How much wine are you making? And be very competitive with trying to do more and more. Now I think we really compete with quality. And for me, 50,000 bottles is perfect because it's really the size that 2 people can do with a lot of attention. And when your team becomes really big, you spend all your time training and coaching and not time working. So I love the size. I love the size that we're at right now, and there's no plans to grow. The other challenge is vineyards. We're really after something very, very unique, and it's hard to just expand quickly. So discovering new things and not moving too fast is really the key.
Sounds very, very good. So at the moment we don't have any questions from our visitors.